First off, I apologize for not uploading more videos recently. Life's been a little crazy, been a little busy as things have started to kind of open back up. Still don't have many gigs on the horizon, have a few coming up towards the end of this year, but I've been particularly busy with my job, which if you don't know, I'm a worship arts associate at a church here in Birmingham. So I do a lot in the way of worship leading, but I also do a lot in facilitating recording and programming and different stuff like that. So for this past week, I've been doing an unbelievable amount of programming and recording guitar. I've been doing a lot of strings and a lot of other stuff that I don't always do, but love to do on the side, and it's been really fun for me to do. Now also, the point of this video is to talk about kind of my process for recording. I've had a lot of questions in my DMs over in Instagram. If you don't follow me there, at @the_Riggs_Taylor. It's linked below, but I'll also put my tag here. And I've been really lucky to have been pretty busy this year with session work. More this year than past years, and honestly, more variety this year than past years, which I'm really thankful for, not only monetarily, but also creatively, as it kind of pushes me in different directions and working with new people and producers and artists and engineers, etc. So I want to talk today really simply about how I go about recording guitar. Now, if you haven't done any of this before, I'm going to break it down in a way that you can understand. And even if you've been recording at home for a while now, there'll be some tips in here for you as well. So, without further ado, let's jump into the video. Oh, wait, but before we do that, I need you to do a couple of things for me. I need you to subscribe to this channel, and I need you to like this video. Because if you don't, other people won't find this video, because that's how YouTube works. So, not making any money off these videos, and I'd really appreciate your help. And without further ado, let's jump into the video. So if you're new to recording, then welcome. There's never been a better time in history to be a guitar player and getting into recording at home. Even 10 years ago, there weren't nearly as many options as there are now, and certainly not as financially accessible options as there are now. So I'm going to go through a couple of different ways that you can record yourself at home. The first way we're going to be talking about is the traditional way, which is mics on a guitar amp. And the other way would be using something like a Kemper or a Helix or an Axe Effects, a modeler type setup, or even just using guitar plugins. But first, I want to talk you through a few of the things that you absolutely need to get started. The first thing you're going to need is a computer. Now, unless you are recording into a vintage console and recording to tape, which if you are, you're probably not new to recording and you probably don't need to watch this video, then you need a computer to run everything through. Now, the computer you already have is probably fine for what you're doing. I personally use Mac, and if you are new to recording, then I would just use GarageBand. GarageBand is free, comes loaded on every Mac, and is an easy gateway into Logic Pro X, which is their professional level DAW. Now, if you aren't familiar with it, a DAW is a digital audio workstation, and that is basically where you're going to be recording everything. You'll set up different tracks, and you'll set up how you're going to be recording, different plugins, and things like that. If you're not familiar with DAWs in general, there are tons of great resources out there, and I encourage you to go watch some videos on breakdowns for that. I actually did one that I will link above here on kind of my preferences for free DAWs and plugins and things like that to get started. So reference that if you're not super familiar with what recording into a computer looks like. Now, the second thing you're going to need is an audio interface. Now, if you're recording with something like a Helix or a Kemper or something like that, it may not be as necessary to have an interface, but primarily I'm talking about when you're using a guitar amp or if you're wanting to record some kind of vocals or something through a microphone. There are a ton of great inexpensive options. Personally, for inexpensive options, I'm a big fan of the Focusrite Scarlett series. That's what I started on before I upgraded to the Universal Audio stuff, but it's a great place to get started. Now, if you're not as concerned about budget or you're not afraid to buy used, I'm a big fan of the Universal Audio Apollos. Any of them are really great. It's been a big upgrade for me from the Focusrite stuff, which admittedly again is really great, but it's just kind of the next step up. So the next thing you're going to need is a microphone. Now, this is a condenser microphone. This is an Aston Origin, which is one of the few condenser mics that I really like on guitar amps, especially in the kind of under $500 range. This one's really good. These are about $250, $300 US new, and it's a super versatile microphone. It was one of my go-to mics for a while on my guitar amp. Now, there are other types of mics, and we'll jump into that in a minute, but basically you need a mic in front of the amp to get started. Now, you also have to be able to run that microphone signal into your audio interface and then into your computer, and for that you will use an XLR cable. Now, an XLR cable or a mic cable is one that you see like this, that has the 3 pins that connects, and it has both male and female ends. These are super common. You can get them for really inexpensive, and all in all, you can get started recording at home for less than a few $100. So there are a couple other things that you're probably going to need if you're recording yourself at home. Again, particularly for guitar or anything when you're running live microphones, it's really a good idea to have a good pair of studio headphones available. So if you are recording along with a click track or a band track and that kind of thing, you want to be able to hear yourself without the microphone from the guitar amp picking it up. This isn't a problem if you've got your amp or your cabinet isolated in another room, but if you're in a room like I am and my amplifier is only a few feet away from the closest studio monitor, I can't monitor through those without it picking up in that microphone. Even if the mic is right up against the grill, it can still pick up a little bit of bleed. This is also important when considering things like having a fan running or air conditioning. If that kicks on, you can get a lot of low-end information or just hissy noise in your signal, and you don't really want that. Especially if you're in an apartment, this is something that you're going to have to work around. Here at the house, I usually just turn off the AC for a little bit when I'm recording, but that's getting a little bit too in the weeds. Another thing I like to have is a headphone extension, and this is just so I can be further away from my desk when recording. Even though these Audio-Technica ATH M50Xs have a pretty good length headphone cable, I am not able to stand up and be a few feet away from the desk, so something like this, it's only usually like $7 to $10 on Amazon, and you can be further away from the desk when recording. I find that standing up and playing some parts sometimes yields a better result than just sitting down for whatever reason. So, if you are taking the amp route and you are miking up your amp, there are a few different types of microphones you can use. One that we talked about a minute ago, a condenser microphone, is pretty commonly used, but it's not the most common, and usually condensers are comparatively a little more expensive to some of their other counterparts. One such counterpart is the Shure SM57. Now, this is a dynamic microphone. The reason dynamic microphones are typically used in recording guitar amps is because they can withstand high SPLs. And SPL stands for sound pressure levels. So these can take quite the beating. You'll see an SM57 used on drums, on guitar amps, and on everything. This is the mic I would start with if you don't already have one. They're $99. They're exceptional on guitar amps, and a lot of times this is the sound that producers are looking for. I've used a bunch of different mics. Typically when I record, as you can see, I have a couple of different mic options hooked up in front of my amp, but generally speaking, producers usually ask for a 57 or a dynamic microphone. That's just been the sound and the standard of recorded guitar for a long time, so it's a good microphone to have in your arsenal. These also work really well on vocals, and they also work really well on drums. Now, third type, and maybe my favorite, is the ribbon microphone. Now, the reason that I like ribbon microphones is because they have a very warm, very full sound, and they are figure 8 pattern, which means it picks up equally at the front and the back of the microphone. So, This isn't ideal in all situations. It's certainly not ideal in an unisolated live environment, especially where there are other loud drums or other loud instruments or other loud guitars on stage, but these capture a lot of warmth. So to combat that, I usually will keep it super close to the amp. The room that I'm recording in is pretty small, so even though it does get some room noise in it, it sounds really natural, and it's not so sensitive as to pick up any kind of excess noise that I don't want it to. Again, this room is a pretty controlled environment, even though I don't have soundproofing on the walls, but a ribbon mic is a great option. Personally, my favorite combination is a ribbon microphone and a dynamic microphone. So before you just throw a microphone in front of your amp and hit record, there are a few things to consider, and all of those things more or less involve placement of the microphone. Traditionally, you want to have the microphone just off center of the cone. Now fortunately, speakers are round and the cone is going to be right in the center. If you don't know where that is, you can take your cell phone flashlight and you can turn it on and look into your amp to where you can see where about the center of it is. Now this cab in particular has a piece of wood right down the middle of the dust cover, so I know that on just either side of that is just off of the axis, just off of the center of the cone. Now, that's not the only thing to consider, and again, all rules are made to be broken, so experiment with placement. Generally speaking, as you get further away from the center, the darker the tone gets, and the closer you get to the center, the brighter it gets. So if you start recording there, and maybe you find it to be a little bright, depending on what kind of amp you use and guitar you use, etc., just let your ears guide you and tell you what you like the sound of. Again, certain microphones are going to be warmer or brighter than others, so also play around with that as well. Another thing to do is have it actually pulled back off of the amp. Traditionally, again, right off axis, right up against the grill cloth is going to be the traditional way to mic it, particularly with the 57, but you can get some really cool sounds either pointed at the center of the speaker like this, or even further back off of the amp itself. There are a lot of ways to get really cool sounds, even with just one microphone. So experiment with that and let your ears tell you what sounds good. If it sounds good to you, it probably is really good. So once you get your mic set up in front of your amp, you can put that on a cheap mic stand, you can put that on top of a bunch of books or whatever it is that you have that you want to use. Good mic stands, about $30 on Amazon, so take your pick. I'll have some linked in the description below. But once I get that in front of there, I need to actually hear what it's doing. So I like to go and record a loop on my looper pedal and then actually have that play back while I'm moving the microphone. Now you don't want to just continuously move it, because then you may hear a part that you like and then you don't really know where that placement was. So what I do is I will get some painter's tape or some gaff tape to put on the front of the grill cloth, because it doesn't leave a residue like duct tape does, and I will mark off different positions. Now while the loop is playing, I'll let it play through a cycle, and it's also important to note that you want it to be a part similar to what you're trying to record. So I've pre-recorded a little loop here, and I'm going to play it, and I'm going to kind of move around some different mic positions. I'm using the Shure SM57, which is by far the most common microphone and one of the most accessible microphones if you're just getting started, and you can hear the differences in tonality when I just move around that same microphone. This is without adjusting any EQ settings on the amps or running through any different effects. This is simply moving the microphone into a few different positions. So let's hear what that sounds like. recording, you may be thinking to yourself, this seems like a lot of explanation and a bunch of moving around, a bunch of audio examples just showing me how to mic up the amp. And you would be right. I am a firm believer that you should get it right out of the box. I don't believe that you should have to spend a bunch of time in post-production, so after you've recorded, to get great guitar tone. If you spend the time on the front end experimenting with mic placement and maybe even different microphones and positionings and such as that, then you will save yourself a lot of time on the back end. And the good thing is, once you get this dialed in with that particular amp and in that particular space, you have a great point of reference. So experiment, play around with mic placement, get it right on the front end. Don't just get something that you think is okay and then expect to be able to fix it in post. You're either going to cost yourself or the mix engineer a lot of headache. And believe me when I say that an engineer really appreciates good guitar tone coming straight out of the box. One important thing to note when you are recording is you never want to see it clipping. So if you see on your interface, depending on what you have, or on your DAW, there is a meter where you hear the microphone coming in. So when it is reading that information that of course is being transferred digitally to the computer, as long as it's in the green, you're good. Now, I typically try to have it metering around -12 dB or so, just because that usually gives me just enough juice if I need to, but I'm not ever getting into the danger zone. If it's just barely in the yellow, you're okay. You could probably stand to turn down a little bit, and if it's in the red, you need to either dial back the volume on your amp or the gain on your interface. If you have it clipping and digital distortion, that can ruin an otherwise really good take. So make sure you do that. Now, I'm a huge fan of loud guitar amps and properly miking them up and really being able to experiment and craft your tone. But the reality is that is not always possible or feasible for most of us. If you have a spouse or small children or you live in an apartment complex, then noise can be a big issue and it can stop you from creating. And as a musician, first and foremost, and a guitar player second, I want to be able to create without limits. I don't want to have to worry about volume being the reason why I don't write more music and why I don't write better parts. So for most of us, something like the Kemper Profiler or the Axe Effects or the Line 6 Helix may be the best option. The good thing is this takes out a couple of variables for recording. So if you're still kind of unsure about recording an amp and miking it up and using some of the mic techniques that we talked about earlier, then something like this takes out some of the guesswork. See, since the signal from this is already profiled a mic'd up cabinet, then all you have to do is hook up your couple of XLR cables to the back of your interface, set it up in your DAW, make sure the level's not clipping, and you're good to go. It's really that simple. You don't have to worry about finding the right microphone for you. You don't have to worry about getting the placement exactly right or messing up the placement or the mic getting knocked over. And really, this allows me to record silently, which for me personally is the biggest plus. Since my wife also works from home some and I come home and need to be able to record, I don't always want to turn on my amp and have it really loud. And frankly, a lot of times it's easier for me to pull up a sound that works really well for a part, even if it's just a demo, on the Kemper. Since this is such a simple process, it obviously doesn't need as much explanation as miking up an amp. But to be certain, there are benefits to both, and that's why I use both pretty equally. I love using an amp, I love using different microphones, and usually that's what I take when I go to professional recording studios, but I usually just throw this in a Pelican case and have it there just in case I want a really specific tone that maybe my amp cannot give me. The great thing about having a profiler is I can dial up crazy high gain tones or really specific tones of certain amps that I may not own without having to drag around a bunch of amps. So if you're recording from home, or if you're just kind of getting started with electric guitar, that's certainly something to consider. So guys, that is it for this video. I hope it's been helpful for you. If it has, please smash that like button, hit subscribe, and hit the bell icon to be notified when I post new videos. If you want to keep up with more of my day-to-day life and see some behind the scenes of this kind of stuff, then follow me over on Instagram at @the_RiggsTaylor, where you'll see a lot more of my guitar playing and my day-to-day life. If you want to see more of this kind of stuff, me kind of breaking down my session workflow, maybe an explanation of different types of microphones and how I pick plugins and signal chain and things like that, then let me know in the comments below. As always, if you have any questions, leave those in the comments below or DM me on Instagram. I do my best to get back to everyone that takes the time to reach out to me. And as always, I greatly appreciate your support. If you're interested in any of the products I mentioned in this video, they are down below in the description, and most of those are going to be affiliate links, so if you buy through those, I get a small commission. Anyways, I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching this video. Have a blessed day, and I will see you in the next one.